So I have some potentially good news in that the UN Security Council has passed a resolution to call for an immediate ceasefire. Much to the surprise, because the US usually votes to veto the resolution for a ceasefire. And however, to the dismay and disapproval of Israel, the US has decided instead to abstain on the vote. So all 14 members have decided to vote for a ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire, with release of all hostages. Now, obviously, Israel was not happy because, of course, they threatened to cancel a delegation visit to the US prior to this vote if they hadn't voted to veto the resolution, not a bill. And, of course, the US, went against the wishes of Israel and decided not to come to the US, to Washington, on their delegation visit. And so we are seeing perhaps a rift, or at least it seems like to be the case. You see, there are certain smokescreen-like effects in play. The reason why it's potentially a positive thing, this ceasefire resolution, is that there are certain things in the works right now. For example, a bill that is being worked through Congress in the US, whereby they threaten to penalize the Palestinian Authority if they decide to go to the International Criminal Court of Justice for war crimes committed by Israel. They've decided to cut funding to the Palestinian Authority. They've also, in recognition of the Palestinian state, decided to penalize Palestine again, of course, if they decide to do anything that it would harm their ally. So clearly, ideologically speaking and institutionally speaking, the US has not budged in any manner. In fact, they've also written up a bill, and it's also another bipartisan bill that is looking at the relations between the US and South Africa. In other words, thinking about certain sanctions that it may place on the country as a result of this International Criminal Court Criminal Court of Justice case that South Africa have brought to the ICJ regarding claims of genocide, which, of course, is deemed to be plausible. So there's a plausible case being made here that the state of Israel is committing a genocide. So the US, of course, is trying its best, to play to its domestic audience in terms of trying to not hemorrhage votes, especially the Democrats. But of course, I don't think they really care that much. Institutionally speaking, Israel is so much of an ally, so much of an asset to the US that it's willing to give the green light of, in reality, in institutional terms, to a genocide. And there are other updates that I have which aren't looking so promising, because of course Israel in the form of Benjamin Netanyahu, is threatening a Rafah ground invasion with or without the support of the US. And if they do go ahead, we have to remember that analysts, not myself, analysts have said that the IOF, the Israel Offense Force, they're not the most bravest soldiers out there. They're not the most courageous, in that for them to undergo a ground invasion, they need to flatten the area. They need to ensure that there are, very little signs of life for them to actually, go into an area, in this wilderness, in this what they call a jungle. And so this will affect the 1.5 million people who are squeezed in Rafah at the border with Egypt. And this will pose a lot of problems for the civilians there. There are also other institutional or situational issues at play here. As this is happening, ActionAid, a huge international charity, has condemned Israel for blocking UN aid to the north of Gaza, which is the most likely, and the one, part of Gaza that is at its most severe level of famine, whereby people are just starting to, die by the dozen. And we already seen 24 children being killed, or literally murdered by this man-made famine. And this is going to continue on. So we've got these institutional factors at play here, which isn't really being addressed, and also the bills being passed through the institutional apparatus of the US, which aren't really being addressed by the Democrats. Of course, it's being pushed forward by Democrats in this bipartisan bill. So what we are seeing is a kabuki theater. The US is pretending to care about ceasefire, but actually behind closed doors, they're trying to serve their ally. And what else is happening in this upside down world? Well, there are reports, and increasing number of reports, of rapes being committed by the Israel Defense Force in Al Shifa hospital. There's reports of being committed against pregnant women. There are, so you've got these atrocities unfolding, and in some ways intensifying, despite what was requested of Israel in the International Criminal Court of Justice, in that what they wanted to see, whilst this case was resuming, is that they wanted to see Israel allow for humanitarian aid and to reduce assaults on innocent civilians to a minimum. And in fact, they've done complete opposite. They've ran in opposite direction. So this is not looking promising, especially when Benjamin Netanyahu is promising or threatening to invade Rafah by ground invasion. And then whilst all this is happening, this tragedy, this human tragedy of suffering, of immense needless death, we are seeing the Jared Kushner, who is the son of Trump, and also somebody who looks like an animated mannequin. He's talking about the luxury waterfront properties that are potentially being built, could be potentially being built in Gaza. And if you've seen the video, he talks about how if it wasn't for the Hamas, if it wasn't for the violent Palestinians or Arabs, which I don't call them Arabs generally, because of course Arabs are heterogeneous group, and Palestinians are have a genetic continuity long term into the past. They actually descend from Canaanites. So a lot of detractors of Palestinian rights like to just call them Arabs essentially, but they're essentially genetically Palestinians. They are attached to the land, and they are being effaced from the land. They're being displaced from the land, and they're being ethnically cleansed from the land, from their own indigenous, ancestral homeland. And Jared Kushner wants to build waterfront properties as they are dying. Another thing is, Jared Kushner complains about them, not using their aid to build and to develop and to invest in prosperity. This is a very racist trope, considering that there is a blockade on Gaza, and that 80% of factories are closed as a result of this blockade. 50% of the people are unemployed prior to October 7th, and 97% of the water is unsafe for drinking. So, and also with the blockade, the US controls what goes in, what goes out. It controls that whether it's cement, whether building materials are allowed in, and for the most part, they do not allow it in. They've even cancelled the entry of chocolates, confectionery, of even pasta at one point. So they have complete control by land, air, sea, and even electromagnetic transmission. So they have total control. It's a concentration camp by all accounts, even by Israel's own academic authority. it's very common for them to admit that it's either a concentration camp or an open air prison. And so for Jared Kushner to just say that, why couldn't they just develop, it should be they who should be developing their luxury waterfront property rather than, the colonizers. Well, it's clear that there are huge impediments here, socio-economic impediments, like a concentration camp. It's like asking, people who are in Auschwitz camp to build their own, economy, or people in a Warsaw ghetto to build. So there is huge issues at play here, and there's. So there are huge institutional pressures at play here. In fact, how can you start and thrive in an economy whereby you're not allowed the very materials that allow you to prosper? These waterfront properties are built using cement, building materials, metal, steel. These things are not allowed in this blockade. Furthermore, there is a huge gas and oil field off the shore of Gaza, which is looking very tempting to gas and oil companies. There's apparently 524 billion worth of gas and oil off the shore of Gaza, which is now seeming to be tantalizing for the Israel authorities. In fact, they've already sold licenses to companies like BP. So you're seeing the talk of luxury waterfront property. You're talking about the profits being made by these oil companies. So clearly this is all benefiting somebody on this kind of like this whole field of dead bodies of Gazan children, of innocent mothers, of fathers, of just children, babies. And so this is where we are. This is upside down now. This is the one of the worst arcs of human history, especially considering that we know about civil rights, we know about equality, we become more sensitive to the suffering of others, and yet we are seeing a green light given institutionally by the party that calls itself the Democrat Party, that is supposed to be the one that cares about civil rights. Well, where is the consideration? Where is the congruency there? They like to put on adverts whereby you have tokenized individuals, people from minority backgrounds working in the CIA or working in government. They like to put on LGBTQ drone pilots, but when it actually comes to institutional actual reduction of suffering for minorities and people who are marginalized and people who are oppressed, well, their profits matter more, their allies matter more, their geopolitical interests matter more, their interests in war matter more. And that's not all really. So we got the monetary interests. You got also systematic rape. You also have the issue of Saudi Arabia, of course. It's funding, or rather, fueling some of Israel's own jets, or rather, its companies fueling Israel's jets. So you put all this together, and you're looking at, it's not a war of religion, as somebody like Sam Harris would say. And this is a video I'm going to do in the future about Sam Harris, how Sam Harris is kind of like Elon Musk. He may be smart about certain areas, but he's actually an idiot when it comes to politics. He's an absolute imbecile. Just like other centrists are, they like to hoot their own horn, but they don't necessarily understand the history of these political conflicts. How it's not Hamas. If it was a case of religion, then why are Saudi Arabia, for example, backing Israel? Come on, it's an issue of class. And also colonialism, with South Africa, for example, supporting Palestine. but not Saudi Arabia? How do you make that judgment of it being a religious war? It's an anti-colonial war. It's an anti-apartheid war. It's all, not that I agree with everything that Hamas does, but it's part of the course that there is going to be some resistance. In fact, the founders of Zionism, not Theodor Herzl, but another person who's known for being a big figure in the founding of political Zionism, Zeev Jabotinsky, he said it's understandable that resistance is, inevitable by the Arabs, and I'll be discussing this more in my breakdown of Norman Finkelstein's exposure of Destiny and Benny Morris. I'll be looking at it point by point. But so you got the superficial appearance of the Liberal Democrats, the centrists of Sam Harris, who think they, who act like they care about common decency, but actually, in actual fact, that they are just upholding a form of systemic racism, which at the end of the day is giving the green light to the endless suffering, endless deaths, and famine. And, there's so much more to discuss here, but I'll leave it here, as I'll be doing a deep dive in the kind of details of the ideological underpinnings of this. But, we'll see what happens next. Israel are thinking about, or rather, threatening to invade Rafah by force, which will mean immense suffering, especially considering that Benjamin Netanyahu wants to thin out Gaza down to around hundreds of thousands rather than millions. So if the ground invasion goes ahead, then this will be the worst situation in modern history, in a situation that's already the worst. I mean, who would have thought that we would be seeing a genocide by a country that is supposed to be a modern country, that is self-described liberal democracy, which is a big laugh, which is a big joke. It's a disgusting joke. It's an ethno-state. It's the most far right you could be. It's an ethno-state in the same way that the Third Reich was an ethno-state. However, it's like if India is an ethno-state, India's to the left of Israel, and of course to the right of Israel would be the Third Reich. But Israel is very clearly an ethno-state that does not regard the lives of the Palestinians. And of course, here's another piece of news. Well, West Bank land seizures has been its highest in recent weeks than it has been in the last 30 years. So Hamas aren't in the West Bank. How do you explain the extraction of land, the seizure of land, annexation of land from West Bank if Hamas are not in the West Bank? Clearly, this is all the war, the concept of the war, the conflict was all just a ruse, was all just a pretext to extract more land, just as it has been, and also to maintain its deterrent capacity, which is essentially creating fear and suffering in the hearts of the people who are living there, so that they do not resist their own colonialism, their own subjugation, to create more fear, of course, in what they call the Arabs, just generally speaking, because they do not consider the actual indigenous people. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, comment, and subscribe.